give it like 2 more minutes.
Okay, cool.
People, yeah. And then maybe I will do a short introduction.
Sure.
For SooHwan, and yeah, then we start.
Okay.
Okay, stream is on. So in two.
Oh, but something is breaking.
No, it was the YouTube. You know, it started to
Oh,
but I paused it, so it's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so in 2-3 minutes, yeah, and we start.
Yeah, well, yeah, like 2 minutes, yeah. Work.
As you prefer. I'm here already, so as you prefer. Anton, meanwhile, so
Yeah.
are you coming on Saturday? Yes.
What on the 20th? Yeah.
20th,
Which
it's a Saturday. And
is,
so then later maybe you can give me the time, and
I will
can
send you the flight information. Yeah, I believe it arrives around 12, about afternoon, 11:30 or 12 o'clock from St. Petersburg.
Okay. Okay, cool. Habibi. Hello.
Oh, cute.
That's the youngest participant.
Mm-hmm.
It's my daughter.
I cannot bring my daughter because it's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, she's sleeping. She's sleeping. No.
Hello? Oh. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
It went out for a second.
So why don't we start?
Yeah, let's start. Yeah, well, the internet is working.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so SooHwan, thank you so much for doing this class with us. You were present at some of the other classes, some of the other sessions, so you pretty much know what it is. Mm-hmm. And basically, by way of introduction, I just wanted to, a couple of years ago, I was invited to do an exhibition about Russian Cosmism in Korea, in Seoul, at the Museum of Contemporary Art there. And basically, it was quite important because to find people that actually live and work in Seoul that are familiar with this topic, because frankly, there was very, very few academics or very, very few experts who were knowledgeable and who were familiar with the subject, because it is so obscure. I mean, even in Russia, not many people know about it. And it was really incredible to encounter SooHwan in the process. I believe the museum found you, or one of the curators that was working on this project, and it just completely amazed me the breadth of your knowledge of theory from Russia and its cultural sort of heritage, and specifically that you were so familiar and so knowledgeable with Russian Cosmism. It's really something quite special. And in the process of our conversation, it turned out that actually it's quite interesting in Korea, because Korea is a divided country. There is North and South. They have radically different political systems, radically different governments. And while in South Korea, which is much more accessible for us, there were very few people with knowledge on this particular subject. It was not completely unfamiliar in North Korea, interestingly enough, which is a much more closed, much more deeply isolated society. But since sometime in late 1950s, early 1960s, because of the links between North Korea and the Soviet Union at the time, and maybe, well, this is a speculative thing, but maybe because of their interest in rocket technology, there was awareness of certain cosmist authors, particularly Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, to the point where even a postage stamp with his image was issued in North Korea and was kind of a and when you realize when somebody ends up on a postage stamp, that this is like a pretty popular, pretty common figure. There were also some science fiction novels that were published, which unfortunately I cannot read because they are not translated to English, that touched on the topic of close to cosmism, let's say, of some kind of a technological immortality, travel to outer space, and so forth. And so this was really quite an interesting sort of discovery for me personally. And it was also like an incredible, immense pleasure to collaborate with SooHwan. And we did a conference, a lecture, a talk at the museum, which was really well attended. And it was really quite remarkable. And then we stayed in touch, and we've published several of his texts in Efflux Journal. So it's a kind of an ongoing collaboration. So I'm very, very happy that he agreed to participate. And, for him right now, it's quite late. It's already midnight in Seoul. So thank you so much, SooHwan, for staying up and speaking with us. And also, it's very nice, the sequence, because last week, Arseniy Zhilyaev spoke about his work and his research. And of course, he edited a book which is called Avant-Garde Museology, and SooHwan recently sent me a text which really fascinated me, which is a kind of a response to that book. And so I hope that tonight's lecture, tonight's talk will touch on that, because the museum is so central for at least further of ideas about cosmism, that it's something that we cannot discuss enough in a certain way. Also being artist, also being in the art field, and also constantly dealing with museums in one way or another. Yeah, but from a slightly different perspective. So maybe this is enough of an introduction, and one is yours.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Anton, for the beautiful introduction. And thanks to Thomas as well for organizing this great event and having me today. Personally, it's a great honor for me to be one of the speakers of this lecture series on Russian Cosmism, alongside with these outstanding colleagues, scholars, and artists. Yeah, and I prepared a PowerPoint for the presentation, so let me share it with you. Let's see if it works. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, the title of my today's talk sounds like this: Avant-Garde Museology from the Perspective of Russian Cosmism. You know what? I think that I could just skip this introduction part, because I've already sent partially the introductory content to Thomas for posting in Facebook page. So I can start right from the first chapter. Okay, Nikolai Fyodorov's Universal Museum. Maybe later, if there will be a question about, for instance, how how came to know this idea of Russian Cosmism, and how things unfolded after that. So maybe later I will talk about it a little bit when the question will be okay. And now I will start from the first chapter. The museum plays a central role in Fyodorov's agenda of immortality for all. The museum is an exceptional human institution in that it dedicated to preservation of memory, not oblivion of it. Given that the essence of the progress consists in replacing old objects with new ones, the museum, on the contrary, is a machine that extends the lives of the object. And the fatal problem of the concept of progress, especially the technological one, is that it invariably involves some sort of division, inequality, and superiority. What kind of superiority? I quote, progress involves superiority not only over fathers and ancestors, but also over animals. Progress makes fathers and ancestors into the accused, and the sons and descendants into judge. Progress is truly hell, and the truly divine, truly humane task is to save the victims of progress, to lead them out of the hell. Fyodorov thought that it is not only wrong, but also very shameful to follow that kind of concept of progress, because it goes against his core idea of indebtedness to ancestors. According to Fyodorov, at the core of the dilemma that humanities all the time faces is the inevitability of physical death. He thought it becomes possible to live with a genuine brotherhood only by overcoming death and thus being liberated from the necessity of sexual reproduction. Then if the museum has really has the technology of for preserving the past, why can't it be radicalized beyond the artworks into the work of reviving of real lives? Fyodorov thought that all human beings who once lived on Earth must be revived from the death and should be preserved in museum, being qualified for artworks. It was the future Fyodorov literally dreamed of, a universal museum with the capacity of total reconstruction of the past. I quote, "If a repository may be compared to a grave, then reading, or more precisely research, is a kind of exhumation, while an exhibition is, as it were, a resurrection." To sum up, the Museum of the Future should be a total institution or mechanism which deals with at least 3 subcategories. First, it will be a new church, which is in charge of physical resurrection as well as spiritual one. And secondary, research organization, by the way, equipped with biological laboratories. And finally, a total school where humanity can meet and teach each other as a brother. The museum turns out to be a central place for the common task of mankind. And taking into consideration this spatial role of past reviving engine, the museum, the profound difference between Fyodorovian museology and so-called avant-garde aesthetics over the issue of the past heritage can hardly be overlooked. As we all know, the essence of the avant-garde aesthetics lies in the complete break with the past, that is, abolition of all previous conventions, and proclamation of the empty slate, 0 degree, where everything so far has been completely erased, cleared. Exactly here in lies the essential performative meaning of Malevich's famous black square. And this is the very point where we can move on the second scene that emblematically demonstrate the opposite position. It is the Kazimir Malevich's anti-museum. Malevich's position in his short essay on the museum is clear and resolute. The museum should be incinerated because the past is not an object of conservation, but an object of liquidation. Destruction turns out to be a creation because creation does not mean adding something to what is already exists, but taking something off from the totality. Malevich argued that life knows what it is doing, and therefore intervening prematurely when life aims for destruction only hinders the path of creation. Likewise, preserving life in the war of museum by giving a certain form to life is meaningless as preserving a corpse. Rather, it's better to become just a handful of ashes and be placed on the chemist shelf. In burning a corpse, we obtain 1 gram of powder. Accordingly, thousands of grave yards could be accommodated on 1 chemist shelf. Our contemporary life should have as its slogan, all that we have made is made for crematorium. At first glance, this radical gesture for the destruction and annihilation seems to literally embody the manifested demand of Russian avant-garde for 0 degree. But with all the contrasting position of the two, I mean the avant-garde aesthetics and Fyodorovian spirit of preservation of past, interestingly enough, there is a very odd commonality between them. It is their radical materialistic attitude to life and art. According to Boris Groys, Malevich's demand for accepting the fate of incinerators is not something like a modern version of barbarism. Rather, it should be understood as an expression of a belief in the cycle of death and creation. At the core of the relentless attitude toward the art of the past lies a firm belief in the indestructibility of art. In other words, the trans-temporal potential of art. The leftover from the operation of reduction, in this case, of course, the operation of incineration. And in the case of picture, for instance, this process of reduction would be the black square itself, maybe. Anyway, the leftover, the handful of ashes here demonstrates the perpetuity of art, because from this very handful ashes might be initiated the whole event of creative life cycle. Since the destruction, all destruction is a material destruction, it necessarily leaves traces. And very weirdly enough, this radical materialistic attitude toward art is very much reminiscent of Fyodorovian view on human body. Fyodorov argued that the only I both brought this capture image from the film, Anton's film, Citizen of Cosmos, which he made in Japan. It is the final, almost final sequence of this film. By the way, very, very beautiful and very inspiring sequence. Without permission, I thought that, sorry, Anton. And Fyodorov said that the only thing higher than all tatters preserved in the museum is the very dusty self, the very remains of the dead. And as is well known, according to eccentric physiology of Russian Cosmism, each unique human body decomposed into dust after death could be rebuilt. No other than collecting all the dispersed particles floating in the universe, particles of dead ancestors' body, and putting together these assembled particles is the very cosmic task, according to Fyodorov, right? And since these molecules would be scattered throughout the universe, man would have to colonize distant planets in order to find these particles, and as well as to accommodate, of course, all the resurrected. To a certain extent, we might even say that exactly it was this principle, materialistic stance, that so-called second generation of Russian avant-garde had inherited from the first, in spite of the decisive discrepancy between these two approaches. And all the Think project, Vishay, which later will be called constructivism and productivism, might be considered an extension of this common imperative, radical materialism in the name of new things, new object. However, before moving directly to these issues, we should touch on one more very, very unique vision of future museum presented after Fyodorov. It is Alexander Bogdanov's Futuristic Museum. The Red Star, the first Bolshevik utopia, is a story about Mars. And Mars is depicted as a future utopian society, which had already completed the socialist revolution long ago, and now with its technological advancements at its peak. Yeah, you know, in the intellectual history, there is two most famous photo of playing chess game. And this is the first one. And we see Bogdanov is playing chess with Lenin, and behind we see Gorky. And the second one is this one. And Walter Benjamin is playing with Braid. When Benjamin was in exile in Paris, he very often visited Braid in Swedenborg. I just brought this as a bonus track. And given that Bogdanov worked as an excellent organizer in so many different fields, for instance, as a philosopher, economist who majored in medicine, and translator of the Karl Marx Das Kapital in Russian under pseudonym, and of course most well-known fact that he was the opponent of Lenin's opponent in the Marxist theory, and the founder of the proletarian cultural and educational organization called Proletkult. But it is not surprising that this sort of multi-layered person even wrote a fiction novel. But still, alongside these facts, still there is another side of Bogdanov that has not been widely so far. Bogdanov was one of the Fyodorov's very unique successors. And the famous scene of blood transfusion in Red Star is apparently definitely shows that, I quote, "We go even further and perform mutual blood transfusion between human beings, whereby each individual receives from the other a number of elements which can raise his life expectancy. Quite in keeping with the nature of our entire system, our regular comradely exchanges of life extend beyond the ideological dimension into the physiological one." As the Martian explained, Bogdanov actually believed that in true socialism, the way of exchanging life between comrades needs to be extended from the ideological dimension to the physiological realm. The belief that, probably the ample example of that belief, which belief might be his own death. Bogdanov died in 1928 while conducting blood transfusion directly to his students who had been suffering from the rare blood-related disease at the world's first blood transfusion laboratory, which he established in Moscow in 1926. In the same vein, it is quite understandable that the museum appears as one of the key places which constitute the future society in Red Star. And this is the illustration of the museum scene from the first edition of Red Star. It is quite impressive that in that the appearance of the museum is quite similar to our contemporary museum, right? And the Martian says that as for our art museum, there are scientific research institutes, schools at which we study the development of art, or more precisely, the development of mankind through artistic activity. Of course, this description of the future museum is naturally reminds us of Universal Museum of Fyodorov, a total institution into which inseparably integrated art, research, and education. Meanwhile, the Bogdanov's prefigurative images goes further. Seen from the perspective of today's concern, the most impressive part of the novel is, of course, the scene around the issue of nature. Due to the rapid population growth and depletion of resources and food shortage, and of course climate changes, Mars, seemingly a perfect utopian society, is standing at a very difficult point to survive. Given that he deals with the agenda that is set on planetary level rather than focused on national or regional problems, Bogdanov was given a new title of theoretician for the Anthropocene, more than 100 years after the novel was published. Accordingly, the universal science about the organization, universal science or technology, in his term as an integrated study for dealing with such a huge agenda, is also receiving a very positive re-examination nowadays. However, it should not be forgotten again that the issue of climate change occurring at the planetary level and the technical solution to it was already raised by Fyodorov. Bogdanov, our fantasy science novelist, is only continuing the problematics which Fyodorov once already set. And speaking of the inheritance relationship between the two, there is another interesting aspect that deserves to be articulated. It is the issue of sex. Actually, the novel's plot touches on two of the most fundamental problems that are supposed to remain even after the construction of classless society. That is the problem of sex and death. Of course, these two is the main field of Fyodorovian contemplation. Even in the future society of Mars, where the gender difference between men and women seems to be overcome, at least in terms of their appearance, but these two problems still exist. It should be emphasized here that Fyodorov was contemplating the world of post-gender and post-procreation, nothing less than the world of after death. For him, the task of overcoming the death is inseparably linked to the task of liberating enormous energy of selfish sexual reproduction and configuring a future image of humanity without sex, free of sex. By the way, it would be apparently closer to asexuality rather than the usual transsexuality, as I understood it. And once again from the film Anton. And Fyodorov's hypothesis of life without sex and reproduction seems to be more radical and fundamental than all of the extreme imaginations of left-wing avant-garde, I think. At least on this issue, Bogdanov's fictional imagination seems to fall short of Fyodorov's philosophical hypothesis. However, there is a separate area in which avant-garde radical imagination had its particular achievement. It is the problematics of material things. On that path, the avant-garde museology seized a new opportunity for experimentation. It's about Sergei Eisenstein's Cine Museum. Recently, Sergei Eisenstein's film October had been discussed anew, completely anew, from the perspective of thing, problematics of thing, object. This new approach is largely contextualized by the fact that the thing theory of Soviet avant-garde in the 1920s has received new attention and illumination over the last 5 or 6 years. As you might easily assume, the background of this new attention is the contemporary trend, which is called a materialistic turn. The topic related to things acquired unexpected actuality today, receiving extraordinary attention in philosophical community, art world, and a variety of academic disciplines, above all anthropology. Regardless of what we could call this new trend, it can be said with a certainty that they show a common intention to move from an agenda centered on the human beings toward the direction which includes non-human beings, and to shift the focus from subject to object, from language or discourse to materiality. And in this respect, they have all a common denominator in a broad sense. It is the turn to object, turn to things. Meanwhile, discussing October as a film about a thing, about object, the first thing we should remember is that the place where cinematic event take place, it's the main shooting location of the film. It's the Winter Palace, right? At the special National Museum. What Eisenstein saw there is a huge department store, so to speak, like Muir and Marlis. Muir and Marlis is the name of the biggest department store at the time. Then what was stored inside this huge warehouse or department store? There were literally all the stuffs like this. Chandeliers and statues and mechanical toys, underground wine cellars, icon paintings, tin toy soldiers, bowls, crystals, Fabergé eggs, etc., etc. Surprisingly enough, what we actually see in this film, in the amid urgent revolutionary events, are all these kind of things. And even more astonishing is that even outside of the Winter Palace, we still encounter the same world of things. To this, all these statues is in the museum Kunstkamera, the first museum of Russia. And even outside of this Winter Palace, we still encounter the world of things. And to the speaking things in October not only includes all the pieces of stuff that fill the interior of the Winter Palace, but also all the thing components which constitute a huge city museum of Petersburg, at the time Petrograd, like this bridge, raised bridge, which split two sides, lifted. And all these statues in Kunstkamera. And of course, above all, the famous statue of Alexander III, made by papier-mâché. In October, putting aside the task of cinematic representation of the Great October Revolution, Eisenstein seems to be engrossed in unfolding all these things and doing a montage of them in one and another way. And Viktor Shklovsky's comment probably summarized the uncomfortable feelings that contemporary critics might fear over Eisenstein's new film at that time. I quote, "It seems as if the statues were carrying out the October Revolution, a gathering of mythical and historical statues, bronze statues, statues on the roof, lions on bridge, elephants, pagan statues, and statues in the middle of the plate shop. Eisenstein got entangled in tens of thousands of rooms in winter Paris." End of quote. And why this happened? The answer should be found in the artistic and intellectual context to which Eisenstein belonged at the time. The debate over the things were one of the most interesting venue and provocative chapter of Soviet avant-garde in the late 1920s, with which late formalism, constructivism, and productivism were simultaneously concerned. Sergei Trezakov, a close colleague of Eisenstein and a key theorist of the Soviet productivist movement, put forward an alternative model to the traditional narrative in his essay, The Biography of the Object. It is a new method that follows what he calls the conveyor belt of things. I quote, "Not the individual person moving through a system of objects, but the object proceeding through the system of people. For literature, this is the methodological device that seems to us more progressive than those of classical belletria." Obviously, this strong argument for the object-oriented approach cannot be limited to just narrative issue, literary narrative issue. It was widely framed by the body of thoughts that constituted the problematics of things at that time, including, for instance, truly remarkable comment of Alexander Rodchenko in his letter from Paris to his wife, Varvara Stepanova. Here it is. Light from the east, apparently this means the revolution, is in a new attitude to a person, to a woman, and to a things. Our things in our hands should also be equal, also comrades, and not these black and gloomy slaves as here. By the way, as here is Paris. He wrote this letter to his wife in Paris in 1925. In 1925 in Paris, as you know, the World Fair, International Exposition, and in the legendary Soviet pavilion, which was designed by one of the most great avant-garde architecture, Melnikov, Konstantin Melnikov designed the Soviet pavilion, and inside this pavilion was displayed Rodchenko's the also legendary workers club, workers library. And besides that, by the way, was displayed the Tatlin's International Monument. And the corner was screened the film of Eisenstein, Battleship Potemkin. So this pavilion itself became some kind of icon, right, of Soviet constructivism at that time. And okay, and going back to the quotation, things will be comprehended, become friends and companion of man, and man will be able to laugh and rejoice and talk to things. This strong stance demanding a comrade-like friendship between humans and things is quite suggestive, in that it invariably reminds us of another radical egalitarianism, which was targeted this time not to things, but dead ancestors. As Boris Groys puts it, Fyodorov's insistence on the imperative necessity of resurrection dead ancestors was based on one specific assumption. According to this assumption, only through resurrecting all the dead ancestors, we might overcome the fatal weakness of so-called socialist justice. The fundamental problem of this so-called socialist justice is that only future generations are supposed to enjoy all the benefits of the future utopia, and whereas the current and past generations should accept without compliant the role of passive victim of progress. The only possible alternative to this undesirable situation is to resurrect all those generations who have laid the foundation for future well-being and let them also enjoy the benefits of future socialism. Only then we could able to eliminate the discrimination between the living and the dead, and finally establish social justice in terms of equality in the full sense of this word. And going back to the film, October, destroying the aura surrounding the exhibits inside the Winter Palace, Eisenstein succeeded in presenting them as bare material objects, as if plucked off from their cultural memories. And in that way, significantly prefigured the most typical characteristics of the modern curatorial project, the object-oriented montage of bare things. Concerning the question of how to influence the world through art, the strategy chosen by Avant-Garde, after all, was to produce thing, not message. Instead of changing the soul of spectator through message, they pursued the way of changing the material condition of the world shared by all. Or whether to understand this thing project as a grand mission for the total transformation of the world, or it was just the beginning of a long journey that eventually would end up as a simple design aesthetics. It is issue to be discussed in another vein. However, we have one more scene to look into before leaving the laboratory of avant-garde museology. It is Chevengur, a ruined open-air museum created by Andrei Platonov. Platonov was an idiosyncratic successor of Nikolai Fyodorov and a very peculiar variant of Russian avant-garde as well. According to his wife's testimony, Fyodorov's The Philosophy of the Common Task was Platonov's favorite book, and he left a dense note in the margins of that book. On the other hand, Platonov was literally a protege of Bogdanov. Born as an as the eldest son of a poor railroad worker's 10 siblings, he was able to make a career as a professional writer only thanks to the Prolet cult, which was established by Bogdanov. However, the utopia that was drawn by the proletarian writer who learned to speak only through the revolution was quite different from that of Bogdanov, the founder of universal science. The first thing to point out about the Chevengur is the community paradise, which was drawn by Platonov. It is a community organized by others. In Russian, prochie. Here, the others correspond literally mean the rest of humans. That is, those who never belong to any class at all. These miscellaneous humans are not Russians, not Armenians, not Tatars, or anybody. They are just orphans and vagrants that were very common during the revolution and civil war. According to the concept of French philosopher Alain Badiou, we could say that these rest of the humanity, rest of the people, are the very excessive element, the uncountable rest of the society. Platonov draw a revolution not from below, but from below the below, right? And the revolution he observed looks like a creepy allegory of the coming century. And in this respect, the assertion that no other than Platonov is our contemporaries acquires actuality. What Platonov is showing is not a world where everyone could be enriched together, but a world of those who claim that we could be a comrade, true comrade, only in equal poverty. This bizarre world with solitude, misery, poverty, and sorrow, not a utopia of happiness, harmony, abundance, and creation, present a utopia of negativity, I'd say, which has not been dared to dream of by the Soviet ruling power of the day, but also by the avant-garde on the other side. In the third part of the novel, at last, the protagonist, Sasha Dvanov, and his crew reached the socialist human Soviet in Chevengru liberation zone. And it turns out that it is an exceptional place with its own laws, orders, and ethics. In other words, a kind of open air museum as a special heterotopia, in a sense of Foucault. And the issue of labor is one of the core themes that penetrate the utopia in Chevengru. Readers are shocked by the fact that in this utopia organized by people who has never read Marx in their lives, the labor has disappeared. The inhabitants of Chevengur created a world where only the sun works. Only the sun works. It means that they don't make or consume anything without besides without the nature gives them, without the solar energy, they don't make anything and consume nothing. They sleep on the land of steppe and live by eating only what nature gives them. And throughout the whole novel, there is one unique scene that gives us the feeling that a real utopia was realized. It is the moment that when this anti-labor world is spontaneously broken and turned into something else. A spontaneous act prompted by the compassion for the life of others, firstly to cockroaches, and secondly to one old sick man, the compassion for others, this spontaneous act triggers a chain reaction of labor and spread all throughout Chevengur. Each inhabitant of Chevengur chooses one person and begins to work for others, exactly like the sun, which does not stop its lavish labor for no reason. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. Meanwhile, the issue of labor is also closely intertwined with the topic of machinery that runs through the entire novel. Surprisingly, in Chevengur, even machines work for others. All Chevengur inhabitants gathered around the machine and looked at the efforts it made for the sake of one suffering man. They were astonished by the industrious fuss it made over the weak old fellows. This altruistic machine, which at first glance looks very similar to Rodchenko's Comrade Things, which I mentioned before, but it turns out that it is far beyond it. I would say outgoing and unmaking it. At the end of the chain of altruistic labor, Sasha Dvanov, the protagonist, devised a self-powered machine which converts solar energy into electricity. And this machine ultimately does not work. But surprisingly, the other humans who came to see Dvanov's machine think that they found what they needed, because they thought this not working, useless object is correct and vital. Why? Because it had been invented and made by the corporeal labor of two comrades. And this correctness and vitality of this non-working machine, this useless object, decisively dismantle the notion of usefulness, the first doctrine of productivist aesthetics, and the last doctrine that they cannot give up to the end. And here Platonov's this non-working useless object, this non-working machine, very swiftly dismantle it and transcends it, I would say. And from this point of view, the tower made of clay and straw, which appears right after this episode, is even more significant. This sloppy, shabby tower built to light a bonfire at night at steppe for the lost wandering people in the steppe, is, I would say, the very response of Platonov to Vladimir Tatlin's monument to the Third International, which is, needless to say, the most prominent international symbol of Russian avant-garde. Here, the shabby clay tower built by miscellaneous humans to recognize each other oppose the myth of brilliant revolutionary memorial. And in this respect, the report sent to the committee by Servinov, a figure is very much reminds of Platonov himself, in many ways, fully summarize the essence of Chevengur. There was no executive committee in Chevengur, but there were many happy, if useless, people. Chevengur had been seized by an unknown minor national group or by beggars who did not possess the art of communication and who had as their only signal in the world a clay beacon where at night straw or other dry substances were burnt aloft. As is well known, the sudden fall of the Chevengur utopia and the subsequent suicide of Sasha caused considerable controversy over the meaning of this ending. Some claim that the ending reflected the author's pessimistic view that utopia on Earth is impossible in the end. However, at least the end of the protagonist Sasha, the ending where he survives alone and walks into the river in which his father died long ago, deserves a different interpretation. Platonov turns out to be a true successor of Fyodorov in this last moment. Sasha went to meet his deceased father, to a place where dad and sisters were waiting for him for eternal friendship of blood. After all, his father yet remained. His bones, his living stuff of his body, the fabric of his sweat-soaked shirt, the whole motherhood of life and friendship. And there was for Alexander a close, inseparable place where could be anticipated the return of that eternal friendship of blood, which once the father had divided in his body for his son. Okay, afterwards. In an article entitled "The Museum as a Cradle of Revolution," Boris Groys presented an interesting view on the Russian avant-garde. There, he depicted a Russian avant-garde as one that the principle of production was replaced by the principle of reduction. And in that sense, a movement toward a free society of sovereign and ascetic individuals that reduced consumption to the level of basic necessity. He argues that avant-garde is closer to anarchism than to Marxism. I dare to say here Groys speaks not in the language of suprematism or productivism, but in the language of Platonovian utopia, a real utopia that is neither symbolic or imaginary. And this real utopia, which is suppressed the avant-garde ambitious future dreams in every way. And for me, there is no reason not to assume that at the forefront of this readjusted perspective on Russian avant-garde lies the hidden origin of the Russian avant-garde, which Groys has been actively searching over the last years namely the legacy of Russian Cosmism. And the 5 scenes of avant-garde museology I have presented so far is nothing other than to attempt to reconstruct this unfamiliar genealogy of Russian avant-garde. Okay, thank you for the attention.
Thank you, SooHwan, for your talk. And I'm opening Q&A. I hope the students prepare the questions for you. So I'm opening the Q&A. What's the question for SooHwan?
Okay, wait a second. Can I
Yeah.
move on to this one? Could you give me a second?
I think Juliana will start, right?
Whenever you're ready, whenever you say.
Wait a second, I can't hear you yet. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the talk and also for the visually rich presentation. And I wanted to ask about your understanding of Fyodorov's idea of museum and immortality. It's something I've been struggling to understand since the beginning of term, whether I actually understand the same thing under the term museum as he does. And what is the link, or how do you see the link with immortality and resurrection? Is it, because I presume he doesn't mean just collecting reminiscences of every person that lived, or even reconstructing their bodies as corpses. He means something more, like bringing back to life. But isn't it but it doesn't even still constitute immortality, right? When you continue being as an object in a museum, you don't so how do you understand his concept of immortality and this link to museum? Is it just, because for me it would be a very weak understanding of immortality, just continuing of what we already have, some like remembering everybody who ever lived, but magnifying it to truly everybody who ever lived, and we can reconstruct. I think, but what does it mean to the people? It's not really immortality, right? If you just continue being as some vivid but lifeless object in a museum, you don't really live your life, right? And then you still, and if you're an object in a museum, you depend on the perception of viewers. But then if everybody is reconstructed, then the people actually alive in that time can give the attention only to a limited number of people. So I wanted to ask, how, when you studied Fyodorov's idea, what is your understanding of museum and how he links it to immortality? What does he mean by the immortality he wants or he demands?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. If I understood your question properly, there is 2 dimensions which we should simultaneously touch on. The first one is the relationship between the concept of immortality and resurrection, and the second one is what is it means that resurrected and preserved and displayed in museum, right? As an object. And you know what? I think actually this is very problematic, quite problematic. If we understood the argument of Fyodorov in literal sense of this word, resurrection and immortality. In particular, if we understand and take this argument in biological sense, I think the true potential of his argument will be missed. You know what? I personally, I think that this is very decisive and important to discern the biological dimension of Russian Cosmism from the cosmic dimension, I'd say. Because, for instance, it is very decisive if we want to differentiate Russian Cosmism or disconnect Russian Cosmism from all of the so-called seemingly congruent ideas of post-humanism or transhumanism or that sort of futuristic visions, right? Because transhumanism is in principle a project for enhancing or management of our body, right? Our body. It is about managing and enhancing the capacity of our body. And in that sense, there is no room for the consideration of the collective memory. I mean, the Russian Cosmism, in the sense of the Fyodorov, is in principle about resurrecting and preservation of collective memory and aspiration for resurrecting all the collective culture and memory. So it is principally not about the individual body. On the one hand, we can understand the project of Russian Cosmism as the physiological and biological project. For instance, collecting all the particles of the dead bodies and put together all the molecules in and get getting back to all the ancestors and so on and so on. But on the other hand, this is a principle, a project of collective memory, and this is the real important point as far as I see it. So the more we could disconnect this literal meaning of immortality or resurrection and the biological or biopolitical dimension, and turn to the cosmological ontology, it would be much more effective and productive, I think. And what I meant by this cosmic ontology, it requires a more detailed and comprehensive explanation. Maybe I could say about it if there will be another question on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So it's, to understand it, it's a project of radical remembrance, but like very egalitarian, not limited to the people who were recorded or to in virtue of their acts or anything, but like remembrance egalitarianly, radically expanded to everybody who ever lived, but in the sense of remembered by those who are living alive in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, what I'm trying to say is that the Cosmism is not just about the physiological bodily thing. How can we enhance our body condition and how can we live forever or something like that? It is in principle a cultural project, right? And then it is some kind of ethical imperative, right? nothing has to be just erased and forgotten. And this ethical and cultural imperative is much more important, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Another question.
And Anton disappeared?
Yeah, he disappeared probably in the middle of your talk.
Okay.
I have a question. It's more, yeah, like I noticed that all the texts you link it, they're like almost 100 years old. And I mean, I understand it's not an accident, like just that was a time where people like actively were into this Cosmism ideas and created things connected to this. But I understand that back this time, 100 years ago, people had like different imagination of the future somehow, and more romantic, and they thought that they didn't know as much as we know now, like, and maybe they were more naive and romantic. They thought that there are chances that we really like will build something like in 1970s where people will be equal and live in some good, perfect society, or that we really will inhabit some another planets and so on. So they didn't know that it's like much harder than we know now back then. So I'm just curious, like why those ideas and this Cosmism is kind of having a new wave or interest somehow, and from the modern philosophers too. Is this interest to like fairy tale or like some like sci-fi fantasy, or is it interest that people still have like some romantic dreams about like some romantic dreams about we really can do and achieve something people 100 years ago believed in?
Yeah.
Like from your point of view, like if you like really believe in these things people believed like 100 years ago, or you have more like nihilistic and skeptical view on these things, and for you it's like sci-fi things more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And yeah, I'm also very curious about that. Why now? Why this idea of Russian Cosmism is getting so big attention, and in which sense this 100 years old ideas acquire that high degree of actuality now, right? Maybe I could respond to your question in two ways. First is to explain how I came to encounter this idea of Russian Cosmism. And secondly, why I also share your opinion, some sort of not negative, but a little bit sarcastic perspective on this Russian Cosmism. Okay, first one, how I came across this idea. Actually, I came across this idea while studying Walter Benjamin. More precisely, while studying his text, Moscow Diary. I don't know how well is known his this text Moscow Diary for you, but Walter Benjamin visited Moscow in 1926 for 2 months and left a very exceptional document of his diary. And I did research on this text, and the primary object of my study was to examine profound transitional meaning of this profound meaning of this transitional period that is from the late 1920s to early 1930s. By the way, through the eyes of outstanding outside observer, Walter Benjamin. And at the same time, my another goal was to find some traces of Russian influence that Russian avant-garde had on the thought of Walter Benjamin. And actually, I was able to find many things, and you would be surprised if I tell you about it. And then among those was for instance, the Sergei Tretyakov, a close colleague of Eisenstein, and the one who appeared in one of the most important essay of Benjamin, the author as a producer. And at the same time, close Russian friends of Braid. Anyway, however, the more I delved into this topic, the more I had to get the strange feeling that in the genealogy of Russian avant-garde, there are something different kind of layer, something different kind of flow and different source, which is relatively unknown to the official general description of Russian avant-garde. And eventually I came to know that it is Russian Cosmism. And at the front four of this unfamiliar genealogy stands Nikolai Fyodorov. If I give you one example, Walter Benjamin actually mentions many important figures of Russian avant-garde. Of course, the very famous one, Eisenstein or Meyerhold, but also Alexei Gastyev, for instance, and Platon Kerzhentsev. And of course, I've known those names. Alexei Gastyev was the person who established the famous Institution of Labor in 1921 with Lenin, and Kerzhentsev was the person who accomplished the famous Time League campaign, national campaign. But I completely was not aware of that before those people was another person who thought about time and temporality in a really strange and to a certain extent crazy way about the time. It was the Muravyov, Valerian Muravyov. He is considered of one of the cosmist thinkers, right? And so personally for me, Russian Cosmism was accidentally found during my research on the Russian avant-garde in view of Benjamin study. And it was really unexpected foundings. And from the perspective of this Russian Cosmism, I could see all the trajectory of Russian avant-garde in a completely new way. And the second one, you know, I've read a book recently, a book of Bruno Latour, one of the most influential thinkers of our age, right? It is this one. So surprisingly enough, this book was translated even earlier than English translation into Korean. And I've read that. The title of this book is Where Am I? Where Am I Standing? And the subtitle is the lessons that quarantine experience of quarantine gives to the people who living on Earth. In his terms, the terrestrial residents. And anyway, I was astonished. It was an overwhelming experience to read this book in a true sense, because it was so intriguing and engaging time to read this book. But inside of me, at the same time, I have to got a feeling of resistance and a strong feeling of discontent. Anyway, interestingly enough, he proposed a new slogan for us, for all the rest of the world. The slogan sounds like this: all quarantine people all over the world unite. To us appears a new enemy, new enemy that we should fight. That is the people who wants to escape this planet. And that's the new enemy, the common enemy that we have to fight out. Whoa, right? And he practically proposed that in this book, that just stop dreaming of the damned cosmos anymore. And it is not territory, it is just map, right? And we should quit the job of mapping, and we should concentrate on more real thing. The real thing is the real lower part of life, the new lower thing, in his term. And I don't know. And exactly, literally after 3 days, I've read one article from New York Times. The title is Elon Musk is writing a new science fiction novel, and we are trapped in it, right? And the writer of this article proposed very interesting new concept: Elon Musk's extraterritorial capitalism. So what came to my mind is that in this sort of situation, what is the meaning of contemplating and pondering on the legacy of Russian Cosmism? It is a very serious question, right? And if we cannot effectively and successfully answer to the question of whether how can we disconnect or just differentiate this idea 100 years ago idea from all these trendy futuristic visions, so-called post-humanism or transhumanism or futuristic, blah, 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 right? So yeah, it's really a urgent task for us all, I think. And Anton, what Anton is doing is, I think, exactly that kind of opposing jobs for put together all the weapons and techniques and devices to fight against this new tendency. But if we cannot answer this question correctly, it will be very easy to fall into this trap. And this idea, Russian Cosmism itself, might be misappropriated in the hands of the enemy. Maybe that's all as much I could respond.
Thank you so much for amazing answer and links. And I wanted to ask you if it's all right, if you can write the title of the book you mentioned about this all people uniting. Yeah, I would like to read it, and yeah, thank you.
Okay, I will later write down the original French title in French. Okay, and as far as I have heard, very much soon the English translation will be published. Okay.
You can send it to me, and I will forward it to that.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
The Zoom will be quit, and they will not be allowed to check it. Do we have another question? Because we are already 1.5 hours on. Maybe Jimena. Jimena, are you there? Do you want to ask your question? What you put in the chat?
Yeah. It's just like I was like thinking, because Juliana was asking this aspect about the resurrection and the immortality, but then also she framed it in relation to the museology, and how this the aspect of the museum reactivate, or how is working this idea that these objects are like it's about display, it's about more like how to trace some kind of philosophical statement in the space nowadays, and how still working this idea of the, or maybe it's also connected with the last question, that why to think again about this idea of the resurrection and immortality, that then maybe is even like connected with Anthropocene like ideas and so on, like that are now so alive. But then no, I was more interested about this relationship with the museology. If you, I don't know, can say something about how these things are, or how this idea of the museum play the role to activate things.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. And yeah, actually this is very challenging problematics, because for instance, Boris Groys, as far as understood, he really literally thinks that the Fyodorovian Fyodorovian style of museology is actually display and preserve all these resurrected ancestors being qualified as real artworks. And in this sense, it's in principle, it is a biopolitical project, and not in the sense of the biopolitics by Foucault, because it is not sufficient, right? It is just partly accomplished biopolitics. And in this case, it's a real total accomplished fully accomplished biopolitics. But of course, it could be very dangerous, right? Almost simultaneously to my mind, some kind of image of super totalitarian supervising dictatorship or something like that, right? So that's why I prefer to concentrate on more cultural and more symbolic dimension of this European museology. For instance, frankly speaking, I think that museum was just for Fyodorov is just perfect quasi-utopian place, right? And alongside with museum, we can put a library. And these two places is the very space where Fyodorov all his life working and living, right? And actually, these two institutions have very specific characteristics, I think, because library and museum are not just the place where the collective memory is preserved, but at the same time, it is the place where we can learn something, right? And as is well known, Fyodorov much more valued these two institutions, museum and library, exactly because there we can activate our ability, our capability of self-learning, right? Not in the case of the official privileged educational institution like university, right? In university, the knowledge is some imposed, right, from the outside, and it always invariably involves the hierarchy and the mastership or something like that, right? But in these places, we can learn by ourselves, and active learning and self-learning was come true. Borrowing the famous expression of the French philosopher Jacques Rancière, the real pedagogy of emancipation will come true maybe in these two places. So museum is not just a place where the artifacts or all the things are displayed and preserved. And this is in principle, very creative, right? Place where we can learn, not only preserve and remember, and we can learn and create it. Ourselves can be created anew, right? In that sense, it is really the exceptional human institution, really. I don't know. I properly respond to your question.
No, thank you. Yeah. It's very interesting about this, like, and also including this library. And also, like, thank you for the lecture. I really like it, this book, and I think it's interesting also now, like how it's framing the nature itself. Like, it's this all the time, like talking about these elements and this touch with the reality.
And following your remark on Anthropocene, of course, I think that there's no doubt that Russian Cosmism could be one of the most well-fitting ideas for the ecologically problematic age of our age, right? And anyone can point out at least two aspects. First, for example, principle, the scale and the scope, right? That this idea brought up, right? It is in principle in planetary level, not in just a national or regional level. It raised the problematics that only can be discussed and resolved on the planetary level. But I think more interesting another point is that it necessarily implies some kind of very strange ethics, strange type of responsibility, right? It's not just about take responsibility in the spatial axis. For instance, we have to worry about the condition of this Earth and the climate changes, something like that. At the same time, we have to take responsibility for the temporality, right? And most important thing is that this temporality not just about present and future, right? It's about past, right? We have to take responsibility for the past also. That is the most crazy and interesting thing. And exactly this point can be a very strong impetus to so-called ecological idea. Because in principle, ecological argument are concerned about the present situation and additionally the future generation in a very short period to come, right? So, but for those who are really engaged in these radical environmental issues, maybe from their point of view, this sort of idea, Russian Cosmism, seems like a very kind of naive nonsense. For instance, we usually say in the case like this in Korea, while the huge tsunami is coming now, and you are collecting shells on the beach, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting about also this about the past, like how it's like now is not just that we arrive here in this certain moment, no? Like, I don't know, like Phyllis de Escola is also like talking about how the colonialism is something that destroy so many things, no? That then is also another stuff like to trace back as a past and so on. Yeah. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe there is another question.
SooHwan, Jakub has also a question, but I would like to ask you if it's still all right for you, because it's very late in Korea, I think. So can we have one more question, or it's better that he will contact you via email with this question?
I can send email also, because I believe it might be for a longer explanation, but depends on you.
Yeah, actually, it's already 4 o'clock, almost 4 o'clock in the morning.
So I will give to Jakub your email if you allow me, and he will send you his questions. Okay.
Okay. Who is the
Jakub, one of the students. Jakub, yeah, one of the students.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we take your question for the last one.
Okay, so Jakub, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, I was just wondering, because you mentioned in case of Einstein the object-oriented philosophy. And so I'm wondering, because as you also then said, and I'm familiar with the context of the object-oriented ontology and the speculative turn, it is as if a philosophical, let's say, direction which is anti-anthropocentric. It is going to the objects, ignoring somehow the environment, going to the substance of the things, said very simply. And so I'm thinking, like, if this in the context of the Russian avant-garde, like how did the version of this object-oriented philosophy looked in the 20s, and if it did resonate more with other, let's say, cosmists, theoreticians, and artists, because as I'm like now studying the cosmists' position, it seems to me exactly super anthropocentric. No, it wants to colonize the space. It wants to go against the nature. It through this techno-positivistic approach. No, and exactly this object-oriented position is contradictory to it. And so I'm just like wondering how was it there? If they reflected, how did it resonate? Yeah, thank you for.
Yeah, also a great question. And one of the most challenging, yeah, I would say, point you raised. The question of whether we can find in the idea of Russian Cosmism some sort of consideration for the non-human beings is also very problematic and debatable question, as a matter of fact. Someone says, as you just mentioned, a Fyodorovian idea is just super anthropocentric idea that in principle there is no room for consideration for the non-human beings. Whereas our sort of so-called object-oriented trend is opposite in this sense, right? It in principle, the interest, the attention of this new trend, ontological tone, is the endeavor to shift the focus from human beings to non-human beings, or at least they are interested in the new relationship, right, between human beings and non-human beings. Whether it is the organic non-human beings or absolutely not organic human beings, it's another question. But anyway, the new relationship with human and non-human beings. Actually, I don't know. Really, we can find this serious, fundamental consideration in Fyodorovian idea about the non-human beings. I don't know, but at least I cannot agree that the idea of Russian Cosmism is just another version of super anthropocentric modernistic idea, because in that case, why do we have to find so many remarks and mention about animals and plants, for instance, in the writings of Fyodorov, right? And the cosmic ontology itself invariably implies these problematics, as far as I concerned, because if we really turn our way of thinking from the biological dimension to the cosmic, it is very questionable that in the space can we maintain the status of our body itself? Is it possible to control our body as we do on Earth? I think it's very questionable. Even the human and the cosmic ontology level still can be called as human. I don't know. So, but in terms, when it comes to Russian Avant-Garde, not Russian Cosmism, it is definitely clear that they had awareness on this issue and this new relationship with things, for instance, with objects. They sometimes called it comrades, like in Trezekov or in Rodchenko, or sometimes co-workers. fellow workers, as in Arbatov, for instance. The so-called issue, socialist objects, actually has very strong, powerful potential, which is to be linked to the many contemporary issues and contemporary theoretical speculations, I think. But as for the cosmic, as for the this object-oriented problematics in Russian Cosmism, yeah, I have to more profoundly delve into these issues further. Sorry, that is all I can respond here and now to your question.
Yeah, if it's fine, I will send the email because like I'm super interested in this.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So Juan, so thank you very much. I think it's very late there, so we will not keep you here more.
Okay.
And greetings from Prague, and thank you very much for your
Okay, thank you. With pleasure.
Thanks a lot. It's
Thanks,
very
Stefan.
nice of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.